We continue now at the top of Daf Zayin Amud Beis in Meseches Chagigah. This is Chagigah Daf 7b. And the previous Amud, the Gemara said that when it comes to Aliyah L'Regel, Ein Nirin L'Chatzoyin, you can't appear partially. And the Gemara learns that from a pasuk, Kol Zechurcha, all of your males. So Rav Yosef thought the statement meant that if a person, let's say, has 10 sons, they shouldn't appear partially, meaning they shouldn't just bring 5 of their sons, they should bring all of their sons. So Amar Le Abaye, so Abaye said back to Rav Yosef, Pshita, that's obvious. You don't even need a pasuk for that. Hai minayu mashvus luhu poshim, v'hai minayu mashvus luz reason. Which one of the sons are you going to make designate as sinners, and which one of the sons are you going to designate as people who want to do the mitzvahs? In other words, how are you going to pick you 5 do the mitzvah and you 5 don't do the mitzvah? Of course you should bring everybody. Rashi over here says, Amar le Abaye hainami lo tiboy lachkra. You won't need a pasuk for that. Devalav kranami pshita me'achar shechayev es kulin. If everyone's chayev in aliyah l'regel, ano yadana dechol echad tzarich l'zaris es atzmo. So every one of the sons needs to motivate himself to come. Deich yomar ha'av lo elu have his reason, lo elu have atzlin. How is the father supposed to say to some of them, you guys do the mitzvah and you guys be lazy and don't do the mitzvah? That doesn't make any sense. And so rather, Ela Krolamayasa. So rather, what is the pasuk coming for? L'cheda Acherim. It's coming for what the Acherim said. We quoted this previously. The Tanya, as we learned in a Brisa, Acherim Omrim, others say, Hamekametz v'hametzaref nechoshes v'habursi. So these are all people who work in jobs which they become very smelly. The people don't want to hang around with them. They're working with they're melding the metal. They're tanners. Mekametz also was somebody that was part of the tanning process. So all of these people, Peturim min Re'iyah. They're all patur from Re'iyah. Shenamar, like the pasuk says, Kol zechurcha, all of your males, and it means to say, Misha yachol lalos and kol zechurcha, that the person who is able to come up together with everybody. People are not offended by their odor. That's the person who's chayiv. Yatzuelu excludes these individuals. She'en yacholin lalos and kol zechurcha. They can't come together with all of your males. And we'll take a look at Rashi over here. Elakra lecheda acherim. Rather, the pasuk is for the acherim. Rashi says at first, V'hainu nami ein nirin lechatzoin. That also explains the phrase they shouldn't show up partially. It means to say, Demisha eno roy lalos. It's referring to people who cannot show up together with everybody else. They have to make their own little group. Like these individuals, they're not welcome with other people because the way the things that they work with makes them smell bad. They have to make their own chabura. That's what it appears to me. In other words, that's what it means. These people are not really chayev, because if you're a chatzoin, if you're in your own group, you're not chayev in aliyah l'regel. Rashi says, my friends explained, that actually Abaye's comment over here, he's not trying to explain what it means, ein nirin l'chatzoyin, because that doesn't fit so well with this. What we're saying over here is, these individuals are not chayev at all. He's just trying to explain the pasuk of kol zechurcha. He's not going back on the issue of ein nirin l'chatzoyin. He's saying the pasuk has nothing to do with chatzoyin, it has to do with the following. Vikashali, but Rashi doesn't like it, he's bothered, so how do you explain the phrase ein nirin chatzoyin? It would be like the Gemara is just leaving that off and not explaining it at all. Plus, anytime you see in the Gemara where it says so and so thought to say such and such, and then when someone responds, they're usually trying to explain what the other person didn't get correct. Don't explain what you're saying this way, explain it that way. That's usually the way it works. So it seems that Abaye is responding to Rav Yosef and saying this is the way you should explain the phrase of ein nirin l'chatzoyin. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, olos b'moed, the carbon olos that you bring on chol hamoed, boos min hachulin, they have to be brought using money that is chulin, regular money, v'hashlamim min ha-meiser, but the carbon shlamim that you're bringing, so that you can use meiser sheni money. Yom Tov Harishon Shel Pesach. What about that which you're bringing on the first day of Yom Tov of Pesach? Beis Shammai Omrim min hachulin. Beis Shammai says you have to use regular money again. Beis Hillel Omrim min ha-meiser. Beis Hillel says again you can use meiser sheni money. Yisrael yotzin yedei chovason b'nedarim unedavos uv'meiser behema. When it comes to Yisraelim, so they can fulfill their obligation of simcha by eating meat from karbanos that were promises, nedarim and nedavos, that they made throughout the year. They said, I'm going to obligate on myself to bring a carbon. Then they can bring that carbon shlamim and they can eat from that meat and they can fulfill their obligation of simcha. Similarly, they can bring meiser behema and bring that animal as a carbon and eat that meat, and that can fulfill the obligation of simcha. Kohanim bechatos v'ashamos, and the Kohanim can fulfill their obligation of simcha by eating the meat from carbon chatos and asham. Let's say the Yisraelim are bringing and the Kohanim are eating from the meat, they're partaking. They don't need to bring their own carbon shlamim. Ubebechor, the meat from a bechor that's brought to them. Uvechaz v'shok, or let's say they can eat from the Kohanim, they get the breast and the thigh of the animal. That's a gift to the Kohanim. That also fulfills their mitzvah of simcha. Avalo ba'ofos v'lo b'menachos. But you can't fulfill the mitzvah of simcha by eating the birds. Bird meat is not going to count. It has to be meat from an animal. And also carbon mincha is not going to count for simcha. We'll take a look at Rashi over here. Olos b'moed bos min hachulin. So the carbon olos you bring on chol hamoed need to be brought from chulin money. Mashma hashta. Rashi says right now the understanding of the Mishnah is as follows: Olos re'iyah habos b'cholo shel moed. We're talking about the carbon olas re'iyah that you bring on yontiv, you bring on chol hamoed. Bos min hachulin v'lo mimos meiser sheni. You have to purchase that animal with regular money, not with money of meiser sheni money. That's a general rule. An obligatory carbon has to be brought from chulin money. But Meseches Menachos, that's what it says in Meseches Menachos. It's going to be learned later in the Brisa. The Gemara is going to ask, why are we saying chol hamoed over here? It's a general rule by olas re'iyah. You got to use chulin money. That's true on yontiv also. So why are we talking about the carbon olas re'iyah that's brought on chol hamoed? It should be talking about when it's brought on yontiv, the same thing should be true. Ushlamim in Amaiser, it said that shlamim, that can be used meiser sheni money. The Gemara mefarish shalmei simcha. Gemara will explain, we're talking about shalmei simcha. That's the carbon shlamim that you bring so you can eat the meat, partake from the meat. That's the mitzvah of simcha, of celebrating yontiv. The Ravinu krab b'chol mili, the pasuk says you can use any kind of money, even meiser sheni money. Then all of a sudden the Mishnah had a machlokus beishamei beisilal. What about that which you're bringing on the first day of Yontiv of Pesach? The Gemara is going to explain what's going on over here. Why are we suddenly specifying the carbon of Pesach? Yisrael yotzin yedei chovas, and then the Mishnah turns to the issue of fulfilling the obligation of simcha. Yisraelim can fulfill the obligation with nedarim and nedavos and meiser behema. Mishum simcha b'chol inyan sheyesh len basar lasova. The idea is that you fulfill simcha anytime you have meat. Ve'in zekukin lizboach shlamim l'shem kach. You don't have to have a carbon shlamim specifically for that. If you're eating meat from other kinds of karbanos, that's fine. For example, b'nedarim and nedavos. Let's say you had an oath that you made to bring a carbon. Shes nadvu kol hashana. Let's say they promised to bring a donation throughout the year. Usually when they would come to Yerushalayim on the regel, that's when they would fulfill their oaths. They would put the emurim on the mizbeach and they'd eat the meat. That fulfills simcha. Now the only reason we say over here Yisraelim with nedarim and nedavos, a kohen could also bring a neder and nedava, but the reason why we say Yisraelim is because we're about to say that the kohanim, and it's exclusively the kohanim, they're going to be eating the meat from the carbon chatos and the carbon asham. Sometimes you'll have oli regalim, they have to bring a chatos or an asham, they did a sin. So the kohanim are eating the basar, that fulfills their obligation. The kohanim don't need to bring a carbon shlamim for the mitzvah of simcha. They can just eat they can just eat from that carbon. The only time they're going to need to bring a shlamim is if they happen not to have meat from a chatos or an asham, etc. Yotzin b'chaz v'shok, also the kohanim can use the breast of the animal or the thigh of the animal that's given to them as a gift. When a person brings a carbon shlamim who's ol regel, they have to give the chaz v'shok to the kohanim. Kohen receives that can count for simcha. Avalo ba'ofos, but birds are not going to count. Bechatos ha'of she'in sova ela b'bsar behema. It's only considered satisfying satiation when you have the meat of an animal. Over Gemara Yalaflo, the Gemara is going to explain that. So the meat of a bird is not going to count for the simcha. It's not considered lasova. And the Gemara says, Ela olos b'moed hu debos min achulin habiyamtav min amaiser. What are you saying over here in the Mishnah? The carbon olas re'iyah that you bring on chol hamoed, that comes from chulin money, but if you bring it on yontiv, then you can use meiser sheni money. That doesn't make sense. Amai davar shebechovahi. Why should that be true? It's an obligatory carbon. Any carbon that you have to bring, the rule is v'chol davar shebechova eino ba elimin achulin. Something that's a davar shebechova has to be brought from chulin money. Doesn't matter if it's chol hamoed or yontiv. V'chitayim. Now, if you're going to suggest as follows, hakamash malon da olos b'moed bos b'yomtiv einon bos. There is an opinion that the carbon olas re'iyah can only be brought on chol hamoed. You're actually not allowed to bring it on yontiv, but that doesn't make sense, because come on, who does that follow? Kebei Shammai. That happened to be Beis Shammai's opinion. That's not the opinion we hold like, so it would be strange that the Mishnah would be saying you can only bring an olas re'iyah on chol hamoed and not on yontiv. And where do we see that? The Tanan, as we learned in the Mishnah, Beis Shammai omer meviin shlamim ve'ein somchen alein. Beis Shammai say that on yontiv you can bring carbon shlamins and you can't do smicha. The Rashi will explain. Avalo olos, you cannot bring carbon olos when it comes to yontiv. Beis Hillel omer meviin shlamim ve'olos. Beis Hillel say you can bring carbon shlamim and olos on yontiv ve'somchen alein, and you can do smicha. So again, this opinion that you're not allowed to bring an olas re'iyah on yontiv, that's the opinion of Beis Shammai. It would be strange to say that our Mishnah is following Beis Shammai. And we'll take a look at Rashi over here. What are you're allowed to use Meiser Sheni money if you bring the Olas Re'iyah on Yontiv. Maybe you'll say our Mishnah is teaching us we don't bring Olas Re'iyah on Yontiv. Even though it's an obligation on the holiday to bring an Olas Re'iyah, but we say you can always make it up the next day. You don't have to bring it the first day of the Yontiv. You can bring it the second, third day of the Yontiv. So therefore, maybe you don't bring it on Yontiv. Again, that's based Shammai's position. Now, the general halach on Yontiv is ochel nefesh. If you are going to eat from the item, so you can do malach on Yontiv. A person's allowed to cook, prepare food on Yontiv. It's not a problem. So a shlamim, the person's going to eat from the shlamim. It doesn't only go on the mizbeach. So you're allowed to bring a shlamim on Yontiv. Vein somchen aleim, but Beis Shammai say you can't do smicha. Sha'asmicha shavusi, because resting your hands on the animal, that's a iser derabanan. Shemeshtamish bebalei chayim, you're using animals. Utanan elohen misham shvus lo olin be'ilan velo rochven al gabi behemoth. One of the things that is considered a shvus on Yontiv is to ride on an animal. Avolo olos, but Beis Shammai say you can't bring an ola. Ein mevian klal. According to Beis Shammai, you can't bring olos at all. The Sfir Lahula Beis Shammai lochem velo legavoa. Beis Shammai hold on Yontiv, you're allowed to do malacha ochel nefesh if it's for you, but not if it's going on the mizbeach. Chutz mi tamidin umusaf. And the only exception is, let's say a carbon tamid or a carbon musaf shezman and kavua, because there the time is brought, it has to be brought on Yontiv. The time is fixed and established. V'chol shezman and kavua ksibuhu b'moado. If the time is set, it says b'moado. V'afilu b'Shabbos. That could be even on Shabbos. You can bring karbanos that are b'moado, certainly on Yontif. And you do smicha. Kevon de mutter lahavia. Now, once it's mutter to bring them, lo gazru shavus levatel smichasan. So once already, it's mutter to bring the particular carbon. So according to Beis Hillel, so you could even do smicha. The Rabbanan said there's no issue of shavus, and you're allowed to do it. Beyond Tevein Bos, Yontiv it doesn't come, and so in any case it's still difficult. What does the Mishnah over here mean? That on Chol HaMoed you bring the Olas Re'iyah. According to Beis Hillel, you bring an Olas Re'iyah and Yontiv as well. And so the Gemara says Chisuri Mechsar Vachi Katani. There are words missing. You have to read it as follows. Olos nedarim unedavos. We're talking about carbon ola of neder or nedava. B'moed bos b'yom tevein on bos. Those types of carbonos, they can come on Chol HaMoed and not on Yontiv. The Olas Re'iyah, when it comes to Olas Re'iyah, ba'afilo b'yomtiv, that can come even on Yontiv. That's Beis Hillel's position. Uchashiba, and when you bring the carbonos, ein abba element achulin. When you bring this Olas Re'iyah, it has to come from chulin money. The Shalmei Simcha, when it comes to Shalmei Simcha, boy and afmin amaiser, that you can even bring from Meiser Sheni money. The Chagigas Yom Tov Rishon Shel Pesach, and the carbon Chagigah on the first day of Yom Tov of Pesach. Beis Shammai Omer min hachulin. Beis Shammai say it comes from chulin money. Beis Hillel Omer min amaiser. Beis Hillel says you can even use Meiser Sheni money. And the Gemara says, Tanya Nami Hachi, we have a brayso like this as well. Olos, Nedarim, Unadavos, B'moed Bos, B'yom Tevein on Bos. Again, when it comes to carbon olas of Neder and Nedava, those can only be brought on Chol HaMoed, not on Yontiv. Ve'olas Re'iyah, Ba'afilu B'yom Tev. The Olas Re'iyah comes even on Yontiv. Uchashi Ba, Eino Ba'el Min HaChulin. As we said, by Olas Re'iyah, it's an obligation, can only be used Chulin money. V'Shalmei Simcha, Ba'inaf Min HaMaiser, but Shalmei Simcha can come even from Meiser Sheni money. V'Chagigas Yom Tov Rishon Shel Pesach, and the carbon Chagigah on the first day of Yom Tov of Pesach, Beis Shammai Omer Min HaChulin. Beis Shammai say it must be brought from chulin money. Or Beis Hillel Omer min ha'maiser, and Beis Hillel say you can even use Meiser Sheni money. And Rashi over here says b'yom tevein on bos. Again, it says nedarim and nedavos that are carbon olas. You cannot bring them on Yontiv. V'afilu the Beis Hillel. That's even according to Beis Hillel. Beis Hillel was saying that if it's an olas re'iyah, can be brought on Yontiv, but neder and nedava, something that you just made an oath to bring yourself, that you can't bring on Yontiv. Svirle latana demasisin de nedarim and nedavos ain't craven b'yomtiv. The Tana of this Mishnah holds that you're not allowed to bring nedarim and nedavos on Yontiv. V'chisharu Beis Hillel ba'olas re'iyah. Beis Hillel only permitted it by olas re'iyah. V'shalmei Chagigah and Shalmei Chagigah. And even though in theory there's a concept of tashlumin, you don't need to bring it on Yontiv, you could bring it the next day. Ikra mitzvasar b'yom rishon. The main mitzvah really is to bring it the first day. Dechsiv v'chagosam also b'yom rishon mashma. V'chagosam also is mashma that you bring it on the first day of Yontiv. And Rashi continues, uchashi boy na boilam and achulin. And again, when you're bringing this olas re'iyah, you only bring it from chulin money. Rashi says, later we're going to say that there is permission, something called tefela, that by a carbon chagigah you're allowed to use some Meiser Sheni money. By carbon shlamim, sometimes people have a lot of people they have to feed. They don't have a lot of property. They just can't do it all from chulin. But when it comes to an ola, there's no reason to do that. Just bring a smallest amount, like we said. You can just use 1 ma of silver and bring your carbon ola. You don't need to feed a lot of people. It's just a small amount, and therefore you don't have this halacha of tofel mos. Afmin Meiser. So then we said that even from Meiser, the Lav Davar Shebechovahu. It's talking about the Shalmei Simcha. It's not considered something that's obligated. You don't have to bring Shalmei Simcha. B'makam sheyesh basar. If you had meat some other way, that's fine. V'hareyesh lo mos Meiser Sheni sheyesh lo lahotz b'Yerushalayim. He's got money of Meiser Sheni. He's got to spend it in Yerushalayim. V'yekna behem shlamim. He can just use that to buy the shlamim. V'Rabbi Kral Kamon kol mine simchas l'simcha. The pasuk's going to say that later on. V'chagigas Yom Tov Harishon. Then the Brisa turned to the idea of Chagigas Yom Tov Harishon, meaning the korban Chagigah you bring on the first day of Yom Tov of Pesach. Shu vadai davar shebechova. That's certainly a davar shebechova. Afilu yesh lo basar harbe. Even if he's got a lot of meat. The alfinon lekamon mivchagosa moso. Gemara is going to ask later why we're talking specifically about Pesach, but it's a davar shebechova. You have to use chulin money. Now Beis Hillel said Meiser Sheni works over there. The Gemara is going to ask on this also later on. It's a davar shebechova. The Gemara is going to say it's tofel. That's the same tofel that Rashi quoted above. Again, that's a special leniency that you're allowed to combine the chulin money and the Meiser Sheni money, and that applies in specific cases. And in any case, the Gemara continues and asks, what is unique about the korban Chagigah on the first day of Yom Tov of Pesach that we're specifying that particular korban? And so the Gemara says, Amar Ravashi says, Hakamash Malon, the point over here is to come to teach us, Chagigah's Chamisha Asar in. We're supposed to make an exclusion. It's only true by the Chagigah of the 15th. Chagigah Asar Ba Asar Lo, but this would not apply to the korban Chagigah that you're bringing on the 14th of Nisan. And Rashi over here explains, Chagigah's Yodalad Lo Kilomar Lohachi Nakat Pesach. The reason why we're specifying the korban Chagigah, which is again a davar shebechova, and it was something that you, in general, you're supposed to bring from Mos Chulin, unless you're using the leniency of Tofa like Beis Hillel is using. But why are we specifying Pesach itself? Erev Pesach Chagigah Acheres. The only reason we're specifying it is because there is another Chagigah that's brought on Erev Pesach. Pesach Meruba. The case is, let's say you have a very large group of people that are all using one korban Pesach, and they know it's not enough for the korban Pesach. The animal is not enough for this group. So they would bring an additional animal called the Chagigah. Pesach Nechol Asova. That way, everybody would have some food. It would be eaten to satisfaction. The Ashmin and Masnisan, and the point of the Mishnah here is to teach us the Chagigas Yom Tov Atzmo Hu De'ina Ba'Elam Achulin. It's only the Chagigah that you bring on the 15th on Yom Tov itself. That Chagigah is an obligation and needs to be brought from Chulin money. Aval Chagigas are Ba'Asr, but the korban Chagigah that's brought on the 14th Ba'af Min HaMaiser, that can come even from Meiser Sheni money. The whole point of specifying the Chagigah the first day of Yom Tov of Pesach is to say it doesn't apply on the Chagigah of Erev Pesach. And we'll continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Ches Amud Aleph.